Well, let me ask you a question. Has your life ever taken a U-turn? Like from a good direction to a bad direction? From a good path to a difficult path? And sometimes when it happens just like that. Well, let me tell you about a time when that happened for Jesus' original followers, the disciples. They were riding high. Jesus, they had confirmed and believed with all their hearts, was the Messiah, the one that had come to bring deliverance. He had rode into Jerusalem just a few days before on the donkey, which was prophesied that the Messiah would come in that way. And he came into the chants and the roars of the crowd. And now they were sitting in the upper room taking the Passover meal with the Messiah. And they were on the verge of the kingdom of God being established, of Jesus taking over. And right after Passover meal, they shared together. Right when, in that moment, they thought it was going to be he was going to take over. He was going to establish his rule. He said to them, "Oh, by the way, I'm getting ready to leave. I'm going away, and you can't come with me right now." Their jaws hit the floor. Their hearts went from the highest high of hopes to deep questioning and anxiety. And what in the world is happening? Have you ever been there? What's happening? We thought it was going to go this way, and now we're not even sure what's happening. You're going away. That's not part of the plan. Where are you going anyway that we can't follow? Thomas asked, how do we know the way? How are we going to know? The story's found in John chapter 13, and it's a radical turn of direction from Jesus taking over to Jesus leaving. And it left their hearts deeply troubled. And life can be that way for all of us. We have those moments because we live in a broken world. Life can change directions. Take a U-turn. Triumphs can dissolve into trials. Right? You know that. You've experienced that. All kinds of setbacks we face in life. There are the prayer requests that you mention when we gather. Many of them health-related. Setbacks. Financial setbacks. We go from having everything in order to, my retirement account just disappeared. Relational setbacks. We're doing fine and then we're not doing so fine. There's conflict. A booming economy can be taken out by a global pandemic. A tragic incident with one bad cop can reignite the underlying racial angst of a good country with a long, dark aspect of its history. And all of a sudden, it's chaos. When life takes a hard turn and it leads to trouble and anxious heart, and the question that I have for you this morning is, what is a person to do? Better, what is a Christ follower to do? Well, we pick it up in John 14, when Jesus gives these words to his disciples in response to the anxiety that they're feeling. He says this, John 14, he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Because that's what's going on inside of them right now. He's leaving. "Trust in God. Trust in me also," Jesus said. "In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that you also may be where I am. And you know the way to the place where I am going." And that's where Thomas comes in and says, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And now we've come to the next of Jesus' "I am" statements, because he responds to Thomas's question, "We don't know the way." Earlier at the end of chapter 13, if you go back and read that, Peter kept asking the same question. What are you talking about? The way. We don't know the way to where you're going. And now Jesus responds, "I am the way and the truth and the life." And then he adds, "No one comes to the Father except through me." The way to where? To the Father. That's what this whole thing is about. Where are we going? Where are we headed? To the Father. The way to God is the answer that we need, and Jesus is the way. That's the main emphasis on this part of John. He keeps telling the people, I've come from God. I am the Son of God. And if you know me, you know God. We are, in a sense, one and the same. We are the Trinity. And I am the way to God. Notice he doesn't say here, even though he had just given this kind of this illustration about a mansion with rooms that he was preparing, at the end he doesn't say, "I'm going to show you the way to your mansion." He says, "I'm going to show you the way to myself. I'm going to come back and I'm going to bring you to be with me." So when he says in there, just a little explanation here, this was kind of a new thought to me as I studied this week, but when he says, "I go to prepare a place for you," says that a couple of times. Do you think that means Jesus is off in heaven doing construction work right now? You think that's what that means? No. He's using some metaphorical language here, but he is talking about what needs to really be done to prepare our way to God. And this all is taking place just before he goes to the cross. When he talks about preparing the way, he's talking about, I'm getting ready to really prepare the way for you to be able to be right with God. He's talking about his death and resurrection for the sins of the world. He's preparing the way for us to be with him and to be with God. He alone is the way and the truth and the life. So let's take a deeper look at those statements and what they mean for us this morning. This is now your outline in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along. Just kind of looking at these one at a time. Let's look at them together. First of all, Jesus, when he says he is the way, he means he is the only way, the only way. You might circle that in your outline, that word only way to God. He is the way, not one of many ways. I am the way and the truth and the life. And then he adds that clear statement that is actually very controversial. No one comes to the Father, no one comes to God except through me. Now I don't know if you understand this or not, but in today's contemporary culture that has a worldly mindset of everybody is their own God, everybody makes up their own way. In fact, I would assert that is actually the ruling principle of the world today. It's absolute autonomy. I am my own person. I make up my own way. And the good news that the world would say is, really doesn't matter which way you pick because all ways lead to God or to happiness, or you find your own path. You find your own way. And so this statement that Jesus is making is a statement of exclusivity. And the world hates this about the gospel. This is the point of Christianity that the world today rails against the most. That there is an exclusive one way to be right with God, to get to God. They hate that. I love that. You remember what Eve heard from the serpent in the garden that started this whole thing. You remember the serpent said, "You will not surely die if you disobey God. You won't die. You will be like God. You will become your own God." In other words, you can create your own way. That was the lie of the serpent. God had previously said, the day you eat it, but the day you disobey this one command I give you, you will surely die. Meaning, you will surely experience separation from the source of life, me. We will be separated. Your sin separates you from God. And the question of the ages that we've sung about so beautifully this morning is this: how does sinful man become reconciled if he's separated from God? How does a sinful creature like us become reconciled to a holy God? You see, friends, when Jesus said, I go to prepare a way, and he's talking about the cross, we need to understand, once again, an important truth. And that is that on the cross, bearing our sin, Christ satisfied both the justice of God, because God is holy and just, and he does what is right, and his judgment against sin, his justice had to be satisfied. And so Jesus took our sin and took the punishment we deserved. And all of a sudden, once and for all, the justice of God was now satisfied. And also in that same act, the love of God is satisfied. Because that's what put Christ there. It was God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. And so Christ on the cross satisfies the justice of God and the love of God, and provides the way for humanity to be reconciled and back into a right relationship, a saving relationship with God. He's prepared the way. And so the question obviously becomes, and we come back through this pretty regularly when we talk about the gospel, another key question is, what have you done with Jesus personally? I just quoted the first part of John 3:16, our most famous verse: God so loved the world, gave his only begotten Son, whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. I don't know if you keep reading in John, if you've ever paid attention to this verse, but it goes into a stark reality. In verse 18, it says this: whoever believes in Jesus is not condemned. Yay! But whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. Friends, there are only two groups of people on planet Earth: those who stand not condemned or not guilty or innocent or reconciled with God through Christ, and those who still stand condemned because they do not believe. Jesus is the way to God. The mantra of the early church understood this. Acts 4:12 puts it this way: salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved. Jesus is the way. But there's more. Let's look at number 2 on your outline, the second part of the statement. Jesus not only is the only way to God, but number 2, Jesus reveals the truth about everything. Again, going back to the garden, the enemy of truth is the lies of the world, the lies of the enemy. And we're oftentimes tempted to believe things that just are not accurate. They're not true to reality. But Jesus comes, and in His Word and in His life, He reveals the truth of God. The true truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. A little bit earlier, John had put it this way in John 1:17, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. That wasn't that the law was somehow wrong, but the way that it was given through Moses externally, it couldn't change a heart, it couldn't change a life. But Jesus came, and through His death on the cross and the new life that He gives, the truth is that we can be saved by this power of God called grace. A little bit later, when Jesus is on trial, right after this statement, the way, the truth, and the life, a few chapters later, he's standing before Pilate. And Pilate's questioning Jesus, and he says, so you are a king then, right? And Jesus answered, you are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this very reason I was born. And for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. And then he adds, everyone on the side of truth, God's truth, the truth I came to reveal, listens to me. And that word listens has the idea of listening and obeying, following. I've come to reveal the truth. So let me ask you a question this morning. Who are you getting your truth from these days? CNN? Fox News? Who are you getting your truth from? You see, Jesus came to reveal the truth about everything. The truth about God and who He is. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I've come to show you what God is like in His mercy, in His power, in His plan. I've come to reveal God. You know me, you know God. I've come to reveal the truth about man. The world says, find your own way. The world says man is just fine. And Jesus says, no, man has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. There's a problem here. If you live in denial of that, you will not be living in truth. The truth about salvation. There's no 10 roads to God. The other religions of the world are false. They are satanically inspired. They are telling us that there is other ways you can get right with God. But none of those others provided a way of salvation that addressed the real problem of sin. Only Christ. He reveals the truth about God's plan for the ages, that God said, I'm going to create this new entity called the church, and from it, I'm going to call men and women and children from every tribe, every skin color, every economic level, and I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to create this beautiful thing right in the middle of the world that is the church, and they're going to live different, and they're going to think different, and they're going to function different, and they're going to be salt and light in the world. And so the church throughout history has been that. Think about this with me. Throughout history, when pandemics hit the world in the ancient world, they were called plagues. The church stood strong in love. People were abandoning one another to try to get to safety. And the church came in and they cared for the sick, even at the risk of their own physical lives. Many of them died in the process, but it shook the ancient world. When the ancient world had this philosophy about children, that if you had a child and it wasn't one you wanted to keep, it was called exposure, they would just leave that child out by the dump heap and just let whatever happens, happens. And the Christians came in and said, no, we value life because that's God's truth. And they came and they adopted and rescued children by the thousands. And it took the ancient world, got their attention. What kind of people are these? It was Christianity living out its light that helped bring an end to things like slavery. That today is fighting to bring an end to things like sex trafficking. Whenever we see things that are just offensive to God or fly in the face of God's truth, we take a stand in love and action. And so Christ is not the truth in just some big, unknowing, generic way. He reveals God's truth about everything. We are called to follow that truth. And then finally, because Jesus is the way to God and the way of God, and because Jesus is the truth, lastly, He leads us to life. Jesus is the life you've always wanted. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Last week we looked at a similar statement. Last week it was, I am the resurrection and the life. Now we see that word life appearing a second time. Jesus is saying, I am the source of life. I am the way of life. At the end of the book of John, there's this really important statement where he gets to the end and he tells us, here's the reason why I've reported to you and written this gospel, this book. There's a purpose to all of this. And he says it in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. This is John's summary statement at the end. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, and that by believing, and here it is, by believing in Jesus, you may have life in his name. That's the whole point. Jesus came to give new life. He doesn't merely Listen. Jesus doesn't merely model the way. He is the way. He doesn't merely tell us some truth. He is the truth. And he does not merely offer us a little better life. He offers us new, God-oriented life. Friends, in the Old Testament, God called Israel to a covenant relationship with him, to live according to his way. Remember, they were getting ready to go in the promised land, and he told the people, as you go in, you're going to find people living all kinds of different ways that are displeasing to me. Do not join them. I'm calling to you to live a distinct way, the way of God. And I'm calling you to live according to my truth that's revealed to you in the law. You're going to go and you're going to find people doing all kinds of evil things. Don't join them. Live according to my truth. He called them to live a unique life that would demonstrate to the world around them, here it is, listen to this, what a relationship with God was to look like. The sad news of the Old Testament is Israel failed on all accounts, over and over and over again, which prepared the way for Christ to come. And now in Christ, we can live out those